The bullet that tore through Lorenzo Moretti's side didn't kill him, but the woman who dug it out might just be his undoing. It was a rainy Tuesday in Chicago, the kind of night that washes away evidence but not sins. She thought she was just saving a stranger in a back-alley clinic. She thought she could wash the blood off her hands and forget his cold, steel-grey eyes. She was wrong, because in the underworld, no good deed goes unpunished. 12 hours after she saved his life, the most dangerous man in the city woke up, looked at his bandaged side, and gave his men a chilling order, "Bring me that woman." And he didn't mean for a checkup. The neon sign above the clinic flickered with a dying buzz. The urgent burned out, leaving only care. It was a cruel joke, Mia Catherine thought, staring out at the relentless Chicago rain. Nobody on this side of the Dan Ryan Expressway cared about much of anything, especially not at 2:00 a.m. Mia rubbed her temples, the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee clinging to her scrubs. She was 27, a resident at Rush University Medical Center by day, and a ghost doctor at this off-the-books clinic by night. It was the only way to pay off the crippling gambling debts her father had left behind before vanishing into the ether. She was just locking the supply cabinet when the front door didn't just open, it shattered. The chime was drowned out by the heavy slam of wood against the wall. Mia spun around her hand, instinctively reaching for the scalpel on the metal tray. 3 men burst in. They were soaked, bringing the storm inside with them. They wore expensive suits, ruined by mud and blood. The 2 on the flanks were massive, holding Sig Sauer pistols with a casual familiarity that terrified her more than if they had been waving them around. But it was the man in the middle who commanded the room. He was being half carried, half dragged. His face was pale, his jaw set in a line of excruciating control. Even slumped over, he was imposing, broad-shouldered, with raven hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. "We're closed." Mia's voice trembled, but she stood her ground. "Not tonight." One of the guards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, growled. He kicked the door shut and locked it. "Fix him, now." "I can't. I don't have the equipment for—" "You have hands, don't you?" The injured man spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rasp, like gravel grinding on velvet. He looked up, and Mia felt the air leave her lungs. His eyes were the color of gunmetal cold, and intelligent despite the shock setting in. They dragged him to the only exam table. He groaned as they laid him down, his hand clutching a crimson-soaked dress shirt. Mia approached slowly. "I need to see the wound." The man nodded to his guard, who stepped back. With trembling fingers, Mia unbuttoned the ruined shirt. Beneath the layers of silk and muscle, a jagged hole just above his hip bone was pouring blood. "Gunshot," she whispered. "There's no exit wound. The bullet is still inside." "Take it out," the man said. He stared at the ceiling, his breathing shallow. "I can't give you anesthesia." Mia said, her panic rising. "I have lidocaine for stitches, but that won't stop the pain of digging into your abdominal cavity. You'll go into shock. You need a hospital. You need Northwestern or—" "No hospitals." The man snapped his hand, shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was iron. "No cops. You do it here. You do it now, or my friend Luca puts a bullet in you to match mine." Mia looked at Luca, the scarred man. He didn't blink. He just raised the silencer slightly. She swallowed hard, her survival instinct overriding her fear. Okay. Get him whiskey if you have it. Anything." "Just cut, doctor," the man grunted. For the next 40 minutes, the clinic became a butcher shop. Mia Catherine, who had graduated top of her class, found herself performing surgery with minimal lighting and a man holding a gun to her head. The man on the table, Lorenzo, she heard the guards whisper, was inhuman. When she clamped the vessel, he hissed. When her forceps scraped against his rib to find the slug, he arched his back and let out a guttural roar. But he never asked her to stop. He never passed out. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat stinging her eyes. "Don't move." She felt the metal of the bullet. With a precise twist, she pulled it free. The clink of the lead dropping into the metal tray was the loudest sound in the room. "It's out," she breathed. "I need to suture." Lorenzo turned his head. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes hazy, but he focused on her. He really looked at her. He took in the stray curl of brown hair falling from her cap, the blood on her gloves, the steady hands that hadn't shaken once. The metal touched his flesh. "What is your name?" he whispered. "Does it matter?" Mia replied, stitching him up with rapid, efficient movements. "If you live, you'll forget me. If you die, I'm dead anyway." A ghost of a smile touched his pale lips. "Smart girl." She finished the bandage and stepped back, stripping off her gloves. "He needs antibiotics, rest, fluids. If he moves too much, the stitches will tear and he'll bleed out internally." Luca stepped forward, checking the bandage. He nodded to the other guard. "Let's go." "Wait," Lorenzo grunted. He tried to sit up, wincing. He reached into his jacket pocket, which had been thrown on a chair, and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was wet with rain and blood. He threw it on the counter. "For your silence," Lorenzo said. "I don't want your money," Mia said, backing away against the cabinets. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "Everyone wants money, cara. Take it. It buys a lot of forgiveness." The guards hoisted him up. The pain must have been blinding, but Lorenzo Moretti walked out of that clinic on his own 2 feet. Before he passed the threshold, he stopped and looked back at her one last time. The intensity of his gaze felt like a physical touch. He didn't say thank you. He just memorized her face. Then the door slammed, and Mia was alone. She slid down the cabinet to the floor, and finally, after holding it together for an hour, she began to scream. The sunlight hitting the penthouse of the St. Regis Chicago was offensive. It was too bright, too cheerful for a man who felt like he had been kicked by a horse. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti lay in a king-sized bed that cost more than most people's houses. His side was on fire. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. "Matteo," he croaked. Matteo, his consigliere and oldest friend, stepped out of the shadows of the bedroom. He was dressed impeccably in a navy suit holding a tablet. "You're awake," Matteo said, his voice flat. "I was beginning to think the vet on the south side had killed you." "She wasn't a vet," Enzo grunted, shifting his weight. "Help me up." "Enzo, you lost a pint of blood. Stay down." "Help me up." Matteo sighed but complied, bracing Enzo as he sat up against the velvet headboard. Enzo looked down at the bandage. It was professional work. Clean lines, tight knots. She had hands like a pianist and nerves of steel. He closed his eyes and the image of her flashed in his mind. Not the blood, not the gun, but her eyes. They were hazel, flecked with gold, wide with terror, but fierce with determination. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cried until she thought he couldn't see her. "The Russians?" Enzo asked, shifting to business. "Handled," Matteo said. "We found the leak in the organization. It was heavy, but we need to talk about the girl." Enzo opened his eyes. "What about her?" "She saw your face, Enzo. She saw Luca. She knows you were shot." That makes her a loose end. Matteo's voice was devoid of malice. It was just business. In their world, witnesses were liabilities, and liabilities were liquidated. She saved my life, Enzo said quietly. She did her job because Luca had a gun to her head. That doesn't make her loyal. Matteo tapped his tablet. I ran her. Dr. Mia Catherine, 27, second-year resident at Rush, top of her class at Chicago Med. But here's the kicker. She's drowning in debt. Enzo frowned. Student loans. Gambling debts, Matteo corrected. Inherited. Her father was Marcus Catherine. The room went silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. Enzo's hand tightened on the bedsheet. Marcus Catherine. The accountant who laundered money for the Irish mob, the one who stole $3 million from us in 2018, and then committed suicide. The very same. Matteo nodded. Small world, isn't it? She's paying off the bookies her father stiffed. That's why she works at that hole-in-the-wall clinic. Enzo stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the Chicago skyline. The irony was bitter. The daughter of the man who stole from him had just saved his life. Logic dictated he should have her killed. She was a connection to a past betrayal, a witness to a current crime, and desperate for money, a perfect candidate to sell him out to the feds or the Russians. But he couldn't shake the feeling of her fingers on his skin. She had said, I don't want your money. The daughter of a thief who refused a stack of cash. She didn't take the payout, Enzo murmured. What? I left 10 grand on the counter. She didn't touch it. I saw it still sitting there when Luca closed the door. Matteo paused. That makes her dangerous, Enzo. Someone who can't be bought is someone you can't control. Enzo looked at the bandage again. The pain was throbbing a reminder of his mortality. He needed a doctor he could own. He needed someone who knew the stakes. And frankly, he wanted to see if the fire in her eyes was real or just adrenaline. He didn't just want her silence anymore. He wanted her submission. He wanted to know why the daughter of a crook was playing a saint in the slums. Don't touch her, Enzo commanded. Enzo, be reasonable. If the Russians find out she treated you, I said don't touch her. Enzo's voice dropped an octave, the tone that made grown men flinch. I don't want her dead. He turned his gaze to Matteo, his eyes dark and predatory. She has a debt right. Her father's debt is her debt. Technically, yes, by the laws of the street, Matteo agreed. Then she belongs to me, Enzo said. A cold smile played on his lips. She treated the wound. Now she's going to ensure the recovery. What are you saying? Enzo sat up straighter, ignoring the agony in his side. He felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with healing. It was the thrill of the hunt. Go get her, Matteo. Now. Now. Take Luca. Go to the hospital or her apartment. I don't care where she is. Enzo looked at the empty spot beside him in the bed. She thinks she can patch me up and send me on my way. No. She stepped into the devil's playground. She doesn't get to walk out. He looked Matteo dead in the eye. Bring me that woman. The fluorescent lights of Rush University Medical Center hummed with a frequency that felt like it was drilling directly into Mia Catherine's skull. It had been 14 hours since she washed Lorenzo Moretti's blood off her hands in the sink of the dilapidated clinic. 14 hours since she had looked into the eyes of a wolf and lived to tell the tale. She was running on 2 hours of fitful sleep and 4 espressos. Her hands, usually steady as a rock, had a micro-tremor that she hid by jamming them deep into the pockets of her white coat. Dr. Catherine. You with us? Mia blinked, snapping back to reality. Doctor. Aris Thorne, the attending physician, was staring at her over the rim of his glasses. They were doing rounds in the ICU. Yes, Dr. Thorne. She managed her voice tight. Patient in bed 4. Post-op day 2 valve replacement. Vitals are stable, but urine output is slightly down. Keep an eye on the creatinine. Thorne grunted, moving on to the next bed. Mia exhaled a ragged sound that was swallowed by the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors. She felt like an imposter. To everyone here, she was the promising resident, the hard worker. If they knew she had spent her night digging a slug out of a Mafia don in a back-alley illegal clinic, she'd lose her license before the sun went down. She needed to get through the shift. Just get through the shift, go home, lock the 3 deadbolts on her apartment door, and figure out how to disappear. She took her break at 4:00 p.m. Seeking refuge in the hospital cafeteria, it was crowded, noisy, and smelled of industrial cleaner and overcooked pasta. She found a small table in the corner, nursing a lukewarm coffee, staring at her phone. No new messages, no threats. Maybe she had actually gotten away with it. Is this seat taken? The voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely out of place in a hospital cafeteria. Mia didn't look up immediately. There are plenty of other tables, sir, but the view from this one is much better. Mia froze. The coffee in her cup rippled as her hand jerked. She slowly raised her head. Standing across from her, holding a bottle of sparkling water, was the man from the bedroom, Matteo. He wasn't wearing a muddy suit anymore. He was dressed in a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than her annual salary. He looked like a CEO, a banker, or a politician, but his eyes were the same, dead calm. You, she whispered, the air leaving her lungs. Matteo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He pulled out the plastic chair opposite her and sat down with the grace of a predator settling into tall grass. Dr. Catherine, you're hard to find. You don't answer unknown numbers. I'm working, she hissed, glancing around. The cafeteria was full of doctors, nurses, families. Surely he wouldn't try anything here. What do you want? I did what you asked. He's alive. I kept my mouth shut. Enzo is appreciative, Matteo said, unscrewing the cap of his water. His fever is down. The stitches are holding. You have a gift. I don't want appreciation. I want to be left alone. Mia made to stand up, grabbing her tray. Matteo didn't move to stop her physically. He just spoke, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming heavy with implication. Marcus Catherine owed $200,000 to the outfit before he died, but with interest penalties and the inconvenience he caused us, the debt currently stands at $500,000. Mia sank back into her chair as if her strings had been cut. The tray clattered onto the table. My father is dead. Debt doesn't die, Mia. It inherits, Matteo said softly. We were content to let you chip away at it with your payments to the smaller loan sharks we control. But circumstances have changed. I pay every month, she said, her voice trembling. I pay almost everything I make. And by our calculations, you'll be free and clear by the time you're 82. Matteo took a sip of water. Enzo is a businessman. He doesn't like slow returns on investment. What do you want? She asked again, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. Matteo checked his watch, a heavy platinum piece. Enzo wants to see you. I'm on shift. I spoke to Dr. Thorne, Matteo said effortlessly. I told him there was a family emergency. He was very understanding. You've been granted a 48-hour leave effective immediately." Mia's blood ran cold. They had gotten to her boss. They had reached into the sanctuary of her legitimate life and twisted it. "And if I say no?" Matteo looked around the bustling cafeteria. He saw the security guard by the register. He saw the nurses laughing at the next table. "Mia," he said, using her first name with a mock intimacy. "We aren't thugs. We don't drag women screaming out of hospitals. That's messy. But consider this. Your father had a sister in Ohio. Aunt Martha. She runs a bakery." Mia gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Don't you dare!" "Then stand up," Matteo said, his voice hardening into steel. "Walk with me to the parking garage. Get in the car, and we can discuss the future of your family's debt." She looked at the exit. It was 50 feet away. She could run. She could scream. But she knew deep in her marrow that it wouldn't matter. Men like this didn't go away. They were like cancer. You had to cut them out or die trying. Slowly, painfully, Mia stood up. She took off her white coat, her armor, and folded it over her arm. "Lead the way," she whispered. The ride to the St. Regis was silent. The interior of the black Mercedes Maybach was soundproofed, cutting off the chaotic sounds of Chicago traffic. Mia sat in the back, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. It was raining again, grey streaks matching her mood. She tried to profile her captors. Matteo was the brain, the driver was the muscle, and Enzo was the heart, a dark, damaged heart. When the car pulled into the private underground garage of the skyscraper, her stomach twisted. This wasn't a warehouse or a dock. This was one of the most exclusive addresses in the city. "Up," Matteo said, opening her door. They took a private elevator. There were no buttons, just a keycard scanner. The ascent was rapid, her ears popping as they climbed 60-70 stories into the sky. When the doors slid open, Mia wasn't prepared for the assault on her senses. She expected dark curtains, smoke, and guns. Instead, she stepped into a sprawling penthouse, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the rainy afternoon. The floors were white marble. The furniture was modern Italian leather, and the far wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the churning grey water. It smelled of sandalwood and old money. "Wait here," Matteo said, gesturing to the living area. Mia stood in the center of the room, clutching her purse to her chest. She felt small, dirty in her scrubs, an intruder in a world of impossible wealth. "You look different without the blood on your face." The voice came from the staircase. Mia spun around. Lorenzo Moretti was descending the stairs. He wasn't wearing the blood-soaked shirt anymore. He wore black silk pajama bottoms and a loose, unbuttoned robe. His chest was bare, revealing the pristine white bandage wrapped around his torso, stark against his tanned, tattooed skin. He moved stiffly, his hand resting on the banister for support. But the weakness only made him look more dangerous, like a wounded lion that could still tear a throat out. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice steady, despite her heart hammering against her ribs. "Enzo," he corrected. He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked slowly toward her. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're trembling." "I'm angry," she lied. "There's a difference." Enzo smirked, a flash of white teeth. "Is there anger? Is just fear with a backbone?" "I like backbone." He walked past her to a wet bar, pouring a glass of amber liquid. He winced as he reached for the bottle, a hiss of pain escaping his lips. You shouldn't be walking, Mia said automatically, the doctor, in her overriding the hostage. You need bed rest. That suture line is fragile. I have a doctor now, Enzo said, turning to face her, glass in hand. Don't I? I treated you. That was the deal. I leave you forget me. That was the agreement. Enzo took a sip of whiskey, his eyes drilling into hers. That was the agreement when I was bleeding out in a dumpster of a clinic. But then I woke up, and I realized something. He set the glass down with a heavy clink. You are Marcus Catherine's daughter. The name hung in the air between them. I am not my father, Mia said fiercely. I didn't steal your money. I didn't cook your books. I'm a doctor trying to save lives, not ruin them. And yet you are paying his sins, Enzo said, stepping closer. He towered over her. Matteo tells me you are drowning Mia, working double shifts, moonlighting in illegal clinics, living in a studio apartment with mold in the walls, all to pay off a ghost's debt. I'm managing. You're surviving. There is a difference. Enzo reached out. For a second, she thought he would strike her. Instead, his fingers brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was rough, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. She flinched but didn't pull away. I have a proposition, Enzo said, his voice dropping to that gravelly whisper that she remembered from the surgery. I don't work for criminals. You already did, last night. Enzo's eyes hardened. Here is the reality, Kara. The Russians know I was hit. They are looking for the doctor who saved me. If they find you, they will torture you to find out where I am, and then they will kill you to send a message. Mia felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't thought about the other side. You put a target on my back, she accused him. I did, and now I'm offering you a shield. Enzo walked over to the coffee table and picked up a black folder. He tossed it to her. She caught it, opening it with shaking hands. It was a contract. What is this employment? Enzo said. Private physician. You live here. You travel with me. You tend to my wounds and the wounds of my men. You ensure I stay healthy enough to run this city. Mia laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. You want me to be a mob doctor? Live in your house? Absolutely not. Read the last page, Enzo commanded. Mia flipped to the back. Her eyes widened. Remuneration, full settlement of the debt held by the estate of Marcus Catherine, plus a monthly stipend of $20,000. You buy my freedom, she whispered. I buy your life, Enzo corrected. For 1 year. You belong to me. You don't leave this penthouse without my guards. You don't make calls without my permission. You are mine until the year is up. And if I refuse, Enzo leaned against the table, crossing his arms. The movement pulled at his stitches, but he ignored it. Then you walk out that door. I won't stop you. But the Russians are hunting, and the loan sharks you currently pay, I own their debt now too. I can call it in tomorrow. You'll be in prison for your father's fraud, or in a ditch courtesy of the Russians within the week. It wasn't a choice. It was an execution disguised as an offer. Mia looked around the golden cage. She looked at the man who held the keys. He was beautiful and terrifying, a monster who offered her salvation from other monsters. She thought of the mold in her apartment. She thought of the fear every time the phone rang. She thought of Aunt Martha in Ohio. She looked at Enzo. His grey eyes were waiting, confident, possessive. 1 year, she said, her voice barely audible. 1 year, Enzo agreed. He held out his hand. Mia hesitated. Taking his hand felt like signing a deal with the devil. But she was already in hell. At least the devil had a penthouse. She reached out and took his hand. His grip engulfed hers, warm and crushing. "Welcome home, Dr. Catherine," Enzo said, and in his eyes she saw a flicker of something that scared her more than his gun. He didn't just want a doctor. He looked at her like a starving man, looking at a feast. "Now," Enzo said, not letting go of her hand, "my side is bleeding again. Come fix it." The master bedroom of the penthouse felt less like a place of rest and more like a mausoleum dedicated to silence. It was a cavernous space, swallowed by shadows and the scent of expensive things, aged mahogany, cold leather, and the lingering metallic tang of blood. Outside, the Chicago storm had intensified to the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling glass in a rhythmic, drowning percussion that isolated them from the rest of the world. Mia Catherine set her medical bag on the marble nightstand, the heavy thud sounding obscenely loud in the quiet room. Her hands, usually steady instruments of her trade, felt heavy and foreign. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the living room had receded, leaving behind a cold, biting dread that settled deep in her marrow. She was no longer a resident at Rush University Medical Center. She was a ghost, a secret, the personal property of a man whose name was whispered like a curse on the South Side. "Sit," she instructed, her voice sounding thin against the expansive darkness of the room. She gestured toward the edge of the king-sized bed. Enzo complied, but he did not move like a patient. He moved with the deceptive lethargy of a predator, conserving energy for the kill. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the black silk of his robe falling open. The fabric pooled around his hips, revealing the expanse of his chest and the stark, pristine white of the bandage she had applied days ago. But the white was compromised. A bloom of crimson was spreading from the center, a fresh flower of violence. "I need to wash up," Mia murmured, unable to look at him. She retreated to the ensuite bathroom, a space larger than her entire apartment, clad in slate and mirrors. She turned the faucet on high, the water scalding hot. She scrubbed her hands until the skin was raw and pink, staring at her reflection. Her eyes looked hollow-wide with a fear she was desperately trying to suppress. She needed this ritual. Soap water dry gloves. It was the liturgy of her religion, the only logical sequence left in a world that had spiraled into insanity. When she returned to the bedroom, Enzo hadn't moved a muscle. He was a statue, carved from pain and defiance. His eyes, the color of a turbulent sea, tracked her every step. They were heavy-lidded, glazed with the fatigue of healing, but the intelligence behind them was razor-sharp. He wasn't just waiting for treatment. He was studying her. "You're bleeding through," Mia said, her voice dropping into her professional register, her armor. She walked to the bed and knelt between his spread knees. It was a position of necessity, the only way to get a clear angle on his flank, without forcing him to twist his torso. Yet it felt dangerously intimate. She could feel the heat radiating from his thighs, a feverish warmth that breached the barrier of her scrubs. "I moved too fast," Enzo murmured. His voice was a low rumble in his chest, a vibration she could feel in the air between them. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic, doctor, until it wears off. You walked down a flight of stairs less than 24 hours after major abdominal surgery. Mia corrected him sharply. She reached out her gloved fingers, hovering over the dressing. "You're lucky you didn't tear the fascia or rupture the internal sutures. If you had, you'd be bleeding internally, and I don't have the equipment here to fix that." "But you'd try," he said. It wasn't a question. Mia didn't answer. She began to peel back the tape. The sound was a harsh rip in the silence. As the gauze came away, the smell of copper and antiseptic filled the small space between them. She exposed the wound. The skin around the incision was angry and inflamed, the black silk stitches straining against the swelling. A small trickle of fresh blood escaped the lower quadrant of the incision. "This is going to hurt," she warned, reaching for the bottle of saline and the antiseptic solution. "Do it." She poured the solution onto a sterile pad and pressed it against the raw flesh. Enzo's body reacted instantly. His abdominal muscles rippled, contracting hard as steel beneath her fingers. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. But he didn't make a sound. He didn't hiss. He didn't groan. He simply endured it, breathing through his nose in slow, measured drags. Mia worked with efficient, gentle movements, cleaning the area and checking for infection. As she worked, her eyes drifted. She couldn't help it. His torso was a map of violence. Aside from the fresh gunshot wound, there were other marks. A burn scar on his shoulder. A faded, jagged white line running from his rib cage to his hip on the opposite side. "You have other scars," she whispered, her fingers tracing the air above the old, jagged line. "This one looks like a knife wound, a serrated blade." Enzo looked down, following her gaze. A dark amusement flickered in his eyes. "Naples, 2015. A disagreement over shipping routes. The man who gave me that thought he had won. And did he? I'm here, Mia. He is feeding the fish in the Tyrrhenian Sea." Enzo's voice was devoid of boasting. It was just a statement of fact, as cold and unyielding as the grave. Souvenirs from a life well lived. Or a life nearly ended, she countered softly. She applied a fresh layer of gauze, taping it down with precise, clean lines. She sat back on her heels, stripping off her blood-stained gloves, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up at him, unable to hold back the question that had been gnawing at her since he offered her the contract. "Why me, Enzo?" He tilted his head slightly, the shadows playing across his sharp cheekbones. "Clarify." "You have billions," Mia said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've seen the way you live. You could hire a team of the best trauma surgeons in the world. You could have a private hospital suite built in this penthouse with Swiss doctors who ask no questions. Why me? Why the daughter of the man who stole from you? Why a resident with debt and no experience in this kind of life?" Enzo stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Then he reached out, his hand large and calloused wrapped around her upper arm. He didn't squeeze, but the weight of it was absolute. It was an anchor. He pulled her slightly closer, eliminating the safety gap she had tried to maintain. "Because the Swiss surgeons are loyal to their bank accounts," Enzo said, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly whisper. "If I pay them $1 million, and the Russians offer them $2 million, they would slip an air bubble into my IV line and call it an embolism. They would smile as they killed me, then board a jet to Zurich." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell the scent of him, sandalwood rain, and the faint, bitter aroma of whiskey. She could see the flecks of silver in his irises, the dark lashes that framed eyes that had seen too much death to ever truly close. "But you, Mia, you are different. You aren't loyal to money. You refused my cash in the clinic. I have ethics," she stammered, mesmerized by his intensity. "No," Enzo corrected. "You have fear, and you have pride." His thumb brushed the fabric of her scrub top right over her heart, as if he could feel it beating. "You wouldn't kill a patient on the table because it would insult your skill as a doctor. Your vanity saves me. And you won't betray me, because you know exactly what I would do to you if you did." Mia's breath hitched in her throat. You think fear buys loyalty? I think fear buys time. Enzo whispered, his gaze drifting to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. Loyalty, real loyalty, is something else. It is earned, or it is taken. He released her arm slowly, letting the heat of his touch linger on her skin like a brand. He shifted back against the pillows, the burst of energy fading as the pain reclaimed him. The mask of the monster slipped just for a fraction of a second, revealing a man exhausted by the weight of his own survival. I'm tired, doctor, he rasped, his eyes fluttering shut. The medication makes me heavy. You need to sleep, Mia said, standing up on shaky legs. Your body needs to repair the damage. I can't sleep, he mumbled, his defenses lowering as the exhaustion took hold. Not when the wolves are at the door. The doors are locked, Enzo. Matteo is downstairs. Matteo is not in this room. Enzo opened his eyes one last time, pinning her with a look of desperate command. You are. He pointed a finger at the velvet armchair in the corner of the room positioned in the shadows. Sit there. Watch the door. Watch over me. It was a command, but it sounded terrifyingly like a plea. Mia stood frozen for a moment. She looked at the heavy brass lamp on the nightstand, a potential weapon. She looked at the sleeping man who held the deed to her life. She could hurt him now. She could leave him vulnerable. She could try to run. But the contract was signed. The debt was real. And outside these glass walls, the Russians were waiting in the dark. Slowly defeated by the logic of her entrapment, Mia walked to the armchair. She pulled her knees to her chest, curling into a ball of white scrubs. She watched the rise and fall of Lorenzo Moretti's chest. She hated him for what he had done to her life. She feared him for what he was capable of. But as the lightning flashed, illuminating his sleeping face, she realized with a sinking heart that she was also fascinated by him. He was a creature of pure will, a man who defied death and commanded demons. And now she was his guardian. I'm here, she whispered into the darkness, though he was already asleep. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. 3 days passed in a blur of grey rain and gilded silence. Mia fell into a surreal routine. She woke up in the guest suite, a room filled with fresh flowers she hadn't ordered, and clothes in the closet that fit her perfectly, tags removed. She checked Enzo's vitals at 800 a.m. She changed his dressings at noon. She administered antibiotics and pain management at 800 p.m. Between those times, she was a ghost haunting a palace. The penthouse was a fortress. The elevator was locked. The stairwell was guarded by Luca the Scarred Giant, who watched her with suspicion every time she walked past. She had no phone. Matteo had taken it for security reasons, and the internet on the penthouse tablets was restricted. She was the most pampered prisoner in Chicago. On the 4th evening, the isolation began to crack her composure. Enzo had been recovering with terrifying speed. His fever broke on the 2nd day. By the 3rd, he was taking calls in his study, sitting in a leather chair with a glass of whiskey. He wasn't supposed to have barking orders that sounded like death sentences. Mia was in the kitchen staring at a bottle of imported sparkling water when she heard the heavy footsteps. Enzo walked in. He was dressed fully for the first time since the shooting. Black trousers, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms. He looked powerful, restored, and restless. You're pacing, he said. I'm going out of my mind, Mia snapped, turning to face him. She didn't care about the protocol anymore. I have no phone. I can't call the hospital. I don't know if I've been fired. I don't know if my landlord has thrown my stuff on the street." Enzo leaned against the marble island, crossing his arms. "You haven't been fired. You're on sabbatical. Dr. Thorne thinks you're having a mental health crisis, which looking at you isn't entirely a lie." "And my apartment?" "Cleared out," Enzo said casually. "Your belongings are in storage. Your lease is terminated." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. "You had no right." "I had every right. That apartment was a security risk. First floor, thin walls, a lock a child could pick. If the Russians wanted to grab you, they wouldn't even have to knock." "So this is it." Mia's voice rose, shaking with fury. "I just live here. Forever." "For a year," Enzo corrected. "And tonight, you're not just living here. You're working." He gestured to the dining room, where the long mahogany table was set for two. But it wasn't a romantic setting. It was precise cold. There were files next to the plates. "Sit," he ordered. Mia hesitated, then marched over and sat. "I'm a Dr. Enzo, not a secretary, not a mistress." "Tonight you are a witness," Enzo said, taking the seat at the head of the table. He poured 2 glasses of dark red wine. "Matteo found something in your father's old ledgers." The mention of her father sucked the anger out of the room, leaving only a vacuum of tension. "My father is dead," she whispered. "His actions aren't," Enzo said. He slid a file toward her. "Open it." Mia opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a bank transfer record, dated 3 weeks before her father's death. It was a transfer of $500,000, not to the outfit, and not to the Irish mob. "He transferred $500,000 to a shell company in the Cayman Islands," Enzo explained, sipping his wine. "Money he stole from me. Money he claimed he lost on bad bets." I don't understand." "We were broke. He died leaving us nothing." "Exactly," Enzo said, his eyes narrowing. "He didn't spend it. He hid it. And do you know who owns that shell company?" Mia shook her head, her hands trembling as she held the paper. "The Volkov Bratva," Enzo said. "The Russians." The world tilted on its axis. "You're saying my father was working with the Russians. I'm saying your father paid the Russians for protection," Enzo said coldly. "He was trying to buy a way out. He sold them information about my operations routes, safe houses' names. In exchange, they were supposed to get him out of the city." "But he died," Mia whispered. "They killed him," Enzo said brutally. "They took his money, they took his information, and then they threw him off a bridge because a dead snitch is cheaper than a live one." Mia felt bile rise in her throat. The narrative she had lived with, that her father was a tragic, addicted gambler, was a lie. He was a traitor, a man who sold out one monster to another and got eaten by both. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, tears blurring her vision. "Because the Russians didn't get us everything," Enzo said. He leaned forward, his intensity pinning her to the chair. "Your father had a ledger, a physical book where he kept the codes to the accounts, where he hid the rest of the money. The Russians think you have it." "I don't. I swear I've never seen it." "I believe you," Enzo said. "But they don't. That's why they shot me, Mia. They weren't just trying to kill a rival. They were trying to clear the board so they could get to you." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was possessive hard. "You aren't just paying a debt," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You are the key to a $5 million vault, and until we find that ledger, you are the most hunted woman in Chicago." Mia stared at him, the horror of her reality crashing down. She wasn't just a doctor paying off a loan. She was a pawn in a war she didn't understand. Suddenly the lights in the penthouse flickered. The music system cut out. The electronic locks on the windows clicked. Enzo froze. His head snapped toward the elevator doors. The calm demeanor vanished, replaced by the instinct of a killer. He released her hand and reached under the table. When his hand came up, he was holding a black pistol. "Get down," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "What? I said, get down," Enzo roared, flipping the heavy mahogany table onto its side with a strength that defied his injury. He grabbed Mia by the collar of her silk blouse and threw her behind the barricade of the table just as the elevator doors chimed. Ding! The doors slid open. 3 men in tactical gear stepped out, assault rifles raised. "Stay down," Enzo growled to Mia, checking the chamber of his gun. "And don't look." The first shot shattered the quiet of the penthouse, and Mia screamed, covering her head as the world exploded into violence. The world was reduced to the deafening crack of gunfire and the spray of drywall dust. Mia curled into a ball behind the overturned mahogany table, her hands pressed over her ears, every muscle in her body coiled tight with terror. Above her, Enzo was a statue of lethal concentration. He popped up, fired 2 controlled shots, and ducked back down as a hail of bullets chewed into the wood of their makeshift barricade. "Matteo!" Enzo roared into the chaos. But there was no answer. The elevator override had cut the comms. They were alone. Enzo hissed, clutching at his side. Fresh blood was seeping through his white shirt, dark and ominous against the crisp fabric. His stitches had torn. "You're bleeding out!" Mia screamed over the noise of shattering glass. "I'm busy!" Enzo snarled, reloading his weapon with a smooth, practiced motion that defied the agony etched on his face. He looked at her, and for a split second, the killer's mask faltered. "Stay down, Mia. If they get past me, you run to the bedroom. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "I'm not leaving you. Do as you're told." He rose again, firing. A body thudded to the floor near the elevator. 1 down, 2 to go. But Enzo stumbled. The blood loss was catching up to him. His aim wavered, and a bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He fell back against the table, the gun skittering across the marble floor, just out of reach. The shooting stopped. Heavy boots crunched on the glass. The remaining assassins were advancing, sensing the kill. Enzo groaned, trying to reach for the weapon, but his body refused to cooperate. He looked at Mia. His eyes weren't fearful. They were apologetic. He had promised to shield her, and he had failed. Mia looked at the gun lying 3 feet away. She looked at the man who had kidnapped her, the man who had forced her into this gilded cage, the man who had stood between her and the Russians. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. Mia lunged. She scrambled across the broken glass, her knees shredding, and grabbed the heavy pistol. It was warm and slick with Enzo's blood. "No!" Enzo choked out. The assassin rounded the table, his rifle raised. He saw a woman in a silk blouse, trembling on the floor. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, a fatal error. Mia raised the gun with both hands, just as her father had taught her at the range years ago. The only good memory he had left her. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil nearly dislocated her shoulder. The deafening boom filled the room. The assassin dropped a dark hole in the center of his chest. The second man turned, shouting something in Russian, but before he could fire, a shadow moved. Enzo, fueled by sheer will and the sight of Mia in danger had launched himself from the ground. He tackled the last man driving a steak knife from the dinner setting into the man's neck. It was over. Silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. The only sound was the wind howling through the shattered windows and their ragged breathing. Enzo slumped against the overturned table, sliding down to the floor. Mia dropped the gun as if it were burning hot. She crawled over to him, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Enzo!" she sobbed, pressing her hands against his side, trying to stem the flow of blood. "Enzo, look at me." He opened his eyes. They were hazy, but he focused on her face. He reached up his bloody hand, cupping her cheek, smearing crimson on her pale skin. "You shot him." He wheezed a breathless laugh bubbling in his chest. "You shot him?" "I'm a doctor," she cried, tearing the tablecloth to make a compress. "I'm supposed to save lives, you idiot." "You saved mine," Enzo whispered. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "Twice." The elevator chimed again. Mia grabbed the gun, pointing it at the doors, her eyes wild. But it was Matteo and Luca. They burst in guns drawn, taking in the scene of carnage, the dead bodies, the shattered penthouse, and the doctor holding a gun over their fallen boss. "Boss!" Luca shouted, rushing forward. "I've got him!" Mia snapped her voice, shifting from hysterical to commanding. "Matteo, call the private ambulance. Luca, get the trauma kit from my bag. Now." The men hesitated, looking at Enzo. Enzo nodded weakly. "Do what she says." Later that night, the penthouse was secure. The bodies were gone. The windows were boarded up. Enzo lay in the master bed, freshly stitched, hooked up to an IV drip. The loss of blood had been severe, but he was strong. Mia sat in the armchair, watching the rain beat against the glass. She had showered, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the gun in her hand. She felt different. The line between her old life and this new one had been erased. "Mia," she turned. Enzo was watching her. "Come here," he said softly. She walked to the bed. He patted the empty space beside him. "Sit." She sat. "You could have run," Enzo said. "When the gun fell, you could have run to the bedroom. You could have let them kill me." "I know," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" Mia looked down at her hands. "Because you were right. The debt is inherited. And I don't run from my patients." Enzo reached out and took her hand. He brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. It was a gesture of reverence, of possession. "The contract stands," Enzo said, his voice regaining its steel. 1 year. We find the ledger. We destroy the Russians. You are mine, Mia. He looked up at her, his grey eyes burning with a promise that terrified and thrilled her. "And I am yours." Mia didn't pull away. She looked at the man who had ordered, "Bring me that woman," and realized that he hadn't just captured her. He had awakened her. 1 year. She agreed, her fingers interlacing with his. Outside the storm raged on, but inside the penthouse the real storm was just beginning. And that is where we leave Enzo and Mia, bound by blood, a contract and a dangerous attraction that could burn down the entire city. Mia thought she was just saving a patient, but she ended up saving a kingpin, and in doing so she crowned herself the queen of a criminal empire. They have 12 months to find the missing millions, dodge the Russian mob, and survive each other. In the world of the Mafia, love isn't a fairy tale. It's a war zone. And Dr. Mia Catherine just enlisted on the front lines. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Right now, it helps the channel more than you know. What do you think was in the ledger Mia's father hid? Was it just money or something worse? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to see part 2, where we fast forward to their life 6 months later, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of The Doctor and the Don. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.